WCW vs nWo World Tour. For many people, this is where the greatness began. As I talked about in my WrestleMania 2000 video, I've covered World Tour and Revenge previously, but looking back, I'm not happy with how that particular video came out, and I'm still not sure why I lumped both games together for one upload. There are many past videos I'd like to do again, not only because the quality was bad, but also because I may feel differently about certain topics, but I digress. Both WCW World Tour and Revenge deserve their own separate uploads, and they definitely deserve more love than what I gave them before. So let's do it. Let's look at WCW vs nWo World Tour and give it the recognition it really deserves. In 1996, a company named The Man Breeze released the first ever virtual pro wrestling game. Published by Asmic Ace Entertainment and released in Japan in September 96, Virtual Pro Wrestling was one of the first pro wrestling games to be completely in 3D and one of the first wrestling games to include multiple rosters from many different promotions. In March of 1997, the game made its way to the United States, localized as WCW vs the World. And this is a game I remember having a lot of fun with when I got it for Christmas that year. Through this localized version of Virtual Pro Wrestling, WCW had a 3D wrestling game on the market before the WWF. Fans of the World Wrestling Federation were still waiting for Warzone to get released, and the most recent World Wrestling Federation game up until that point was In Your House. And if we're being honest here, In Your House didn't exactly set the world on fire. I still liked it though because I had no choice but to like it. WrestleMania the arcade game still leagues better, but beggars can't be choosers either. I've told this story before, but that Christmas I got WCW vs the World, In Your House and Power Move Pro Wrestling from Santa Claus, and it was really Power Move and WCW that got the most play time. And even though on the grand scheme of things WCW vs the World didn't look like much, it still played really well. The foundations were there for a very good game, and it did not take The Man Breeze and Asmic Ace long to work out how to make the game even better. Virtual Pro Wrestling was going to make its way to the N64. The Man Breeze changed their name to Aki. The developers looked at what was good about their first pro wrestling game and they got to work making it even better. Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 was released in Japan in late 1997, while WCW vs nWo World Tour was released around the same time in the United States. Now, calling the WCW game a reskin or a mere localization of Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 would be incredibly wrong. Both games do play the same, yet there's a lot of differences between the two. And in this video, we're going to look at a lot of these differences, and you're quickly going to realize that the Japanese game had much more going for it. Before we do that though, let's talk about what it's like to actually play these games, especially today when you could easily just play Revenge or No Mercy if you wanted to. Without going into details again about what each button does, you can see the WrestleMania 2000 video for all that stuff. I will say that when I first played this game all those years ago, I was legitimately blown away. In comparison to WCW vs the World, this was really something else. The best way to describe it, keeping in mind that I'd never played an N64 arcade game up until that point, would be extremely smooth and extremely responsive. WCW vs the World and Power Move Pro Wrestling had a little bit of awkwardness to them. The way the characters walked and the way they ran in the ring, the way your positioning had to be spot on, and in more general terms, the lack of overall freedom about what you could do in the ring was more or less gone when you first played WCW vs nWo World Tour. Everything about the game was extremely solid from an in-ring perspective, and as soon as you finish one game, you'll want to play another. Now, in saying that, going back to World Tour nowadays is more of a nostalgia quest than anything else. There's some basic stuff missing here that would thankfully get added in newer arcade games, such as the ability to bring weapons into the ring, the ability to slide back inside the ropes by running, the ability to trigger your special meter instead of it happening automatically. There's plenty of these little things that you instantly notice are missing when playing World Tour again, and for that reason, new players might want to look at WCW Revenge or the other games that followed. But for those of you who remember playing this when it first got released, then man, you're going to get that nostalgia feeling as soon as you boot the game up again. The title screen music, the layout of the menu system with the wrestling ring being visible, the art used for the character select screen, even the wrestler models that look pretty grim in comparison to later games. You guys who first played this back in late 97 and 98 are gonna feel it for sure. In a gameplay sense, matches don't feel as long in World Tour. I'm not sure if this was simply due to the easier difficulty, even when set to hard. And overall, when playing today, it does feel more like a prototype for what was to come, but it's still great, and it's even better if you play using a real N64 controller. As a kid, I was amazed that all these wrestlers and all these moves were packed into a single game cartridge, but more than that, I was amazed at how well it all played. So amazed that I got completely addicted to this game. I had a PlayStation back then. I didn't have an N64. My friend would end up getting an N64 by the time Revenge was released. But before that, we had this shop close by where you could rent out consoles for the night. I must have rented that N64 of theirs about 6 or 7 times in the space of 2 months just so I could play World Tour. And you know, I probably could have saved that money and just bought the console and game, but that would have involved begging my parents for a little extra cash. We didn't have much money, and spending bits and pieces here and there was much more doable than putting down a lump sum of cash. And I'll always remember those nights sitting up in my bedroom until the wee hours playing this game and GoldenEye 007 over and over again. That's why I love this game. It brings me right back to a time in my life where I had no worries and didn't have any real responsibilities. And playing World Tour again today gives me back a little bit of that comfort, even if it's just for a few minutes. You guys will have your own games, movies, and music that does the exact same thing for you, so let me know in the comments what brings you back to those simpler times. Right, enough with all the emotional bollocks, let's get down to some serious business, some serious horseman business. WCW vs nWo World Tour has a few game modes, but nothing that's gonna blow your socks off. There's a WCW vs nWo mode. Pick a side, pick up to 5 wrestlers, and you'll compete in singles matches where the winner stays on. If you beat an opponent with 6, for example, then 6 is going to continue on to face the next WCW wrestler. Keep going until one team has no wrestlers left, and congratulations, you now rule WCW. League Challenge mode is your standard arcade mode where you'll pick a promotion. The nWo and fictional promotions are included here, by the way, and you'll go through a series of matches to claim a championship. There's heavyweight, cruiserweight, and tag team championships to win, and this is where you'll unlock additional characters. In League mode, every wrestler has to fight each other while gaining points for wins. To win the league, you have to end the mode with the most points. And then there's a standard tournament mode. Nothing special, but incredible fun if you have a bunch of people over who want to become king of World Tour. Let's take a look at Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 though, and you're gonna quickly notice how much we got screwed over here. Champion Road is the same as League Challenge. 5-on-5 eliminations, the same as WCW vs nWo mode, only you're not restricted to just nWo and WCW guys. League modes in here, tournament modes in here. Battle Royals can be selected from the main menu, though do keep in mind you can also select these from the exhibition menu in the US game. But look, Wrestler Edit mode. In here you can change character costumes, character names, and you can even add masks that some of the wrestlers actually wore at one point in their careers. It's not a deep edit mode like WrestleMania 2000 or No Mercy. It's a bit more like the edit mode found in WCW Revenge, but it's still here, and I would have wasted so much time playing around with this when I was younger. It's a real shame it got cut from WCW World Tour. Next, let's look at the basic rosters. Here's the WCW vs nWo World Tour roster, and it's pretty good. You've got WCW guys such as Lex Luger, Sting, Ric Flair, the Steiner brothers, and Eddie Guerrero to choose from. On the nWo side, we've got Hogan, the Outsiders, Bischoff, Vicious and Delicious, and Syxx. Again, it's a good selection here that at the time you really couldn't complain about. You've also got 4 costume slots that let you play as other versions of your favourite characters, including Surfer Sting or Red and Yellow Hulk Hogan. But it's a real shame that edit mode wasn't included here, so we could potentially add even more versions. We then get fictional characters based on real wrestlers found in the Japanese game. Hayabusa, for example, has been renamed Hannibal, and Taka Michinoku has been renamed Black Belt. Annoying, but understandable. There's also some hidden wrestlers they unlock, including Diamond Dallas Page, Macho Man Randy Savage, Wrath, Glacier, Joe Bruiser, who's actually Muhammad Ali, and Black Widow, who's actually the legendary Manami Toyota. You may be thinking this is a good roster, and indeed, it is a good roster, but wait until you see who you can select in the Japanese game. Now, I'm one of those people who kinda get annoyed when others point out you should have played this version instead, or you don't get the full experience because of this, that, or the other. Another pet peeve of mine is when people point out you should have watched this show with subtitles instead of the inferior dubbed version, you know, that kind of stuff. All these kind of things drive me fucking insane, because if I wanted to do something like that, I would have made the conscious effort to do so in the first place. With that in mind though, what I'm about to say next really makes me feel like a prick, so apologies in advance. But if you're gonna play this game today, I highly recommend ditching WCW World Tour in favour of Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, and that's because of the roster. Better yet, download the English translation patch. There's still a few spelling mistakes here and there, and some of the font sizes aren't right, but just look at this. nWo Strong Style's a New Japan roster with guys like Tatsumi Fujinami, Masahiro Chono, Jushin Liger, and the Great Muta. Empire Wrestling's an All Japan roster with guys like Kenta Kobashi, Steve Williams, Stan Hansen, and Jumbo Tsuruta. The Wrestle of Universe roster's a Shoot Fight roster with Ken Shamrock, Baz Rutten, and Minoru Suzuki. Dead or Alive's a Wrestle and Romance or Wrestling Association R and FMW roster with folks like Tenryu, Onita, Vader, and the Road Warriors. And finally, Michinoku Pro's represented in the Independent Local League with the Great Sasuke, Taka Michinoku, Dek Togo, and others. If this isn't enough for some reason, check out the Legends roster. Inoki, Baba, Terry Funk, Mil Mascaras, Bruiser Brody, Dynamite Kid, Dos Caras, Andre the Giant. Guys, we got robbed, we really did. And yes, I know it comes down to licensing and all that, but the sheer amount of additional characters in VPW64 makes it the better game by default, not even mentioning the additional moves and additional fight styles that come along with it. It's not just the roster and edit modes that make VPW64 different than WCW World Tour though. There's a few other curious differences that are worth talking about. Glacier and Wrath are not included in the Japanese game. Maybe Glacier was too awesome for Japanese players, I don't know. But neither he nor his Blood Run's Cold Enemy are available in Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Costumes are also different. In the Japanese game, you can select Eddie Guerrero's Black Tiger outfit, and Chris Benoit's been given multiple attires that go back to his days in Japan. Even Wild Pegasus is included here. And there's other small differences, including Hulk Hogan having slightly different colours for his ring gear. Diamond Dallas Page and Randy Savage do not need to be unlocked in VPW64. However, DDP does not have the Diamond Cutter as his finisher in the Japanese release. Instead, he has a twirling powerbomb, which is a move he performed in real life, by the way. Scott Hall has the incorrect sit-down crucifix powerbomb in WCW World Tour, yet the correct version of the Outsider's Edge is doable in the Japanese game. And just generally speaking, the finishing moves in both games are a little weird. Sting, for example, has the Deathlock and Death Drop as regular moves, yet like so many other wrestlers in the game, his finisher is a powerbomb. So in regards to finishers and the choice of moves that wrestlers have been given, things could have been a bit more authentic if the developers took greater care in their selections. To be fair too, Aki were only starting off here. They would absolutely 100% make up for this in WCW Revenge, and their subsequent games would feature much more personality for each and every wrestler. But it is worth mentioning that the move selections could have been better for both World Tour and Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Things like the Diamond Cutter being missing in the Japanese game and the Outsider's Edge being wrong in the US game though, that stuff's a bit weird. These games were developed at the exact same time, so I've no idea how they messed these up. Some might say there's enough in the US release to warrant choosing it over the Japanese release, but I don't really think the Diamond Cutter, Glacier and Wrath make up for the additional stuff you get in Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. Something else that makes the Japanese release better is the fact that matches get scored after the final bell. The moves you pull off, the audience's reaction, and the appeal of the match itself get scored, and these scores are derived from how well you played. Reversing moves, pulling off aerial attacks, and delivering special moves will make your match score higher, and finding a good balance between strike moves and grapple moves also has an effect on your final score. You can also save this data to your own personal profile, meaning you can get an aggregate score for all the matches you compete in and see your average performance numbers across multiple matchups. This is a great feature that becomes excellent once you've unlocked every wrestler and won every championship. With these early Aki games, you basically have nothing to do but play exhibition matches once you've done everything else. So with this system in place, you could potentially try and have better exhibition matches in order to get better scores. A friend can also join in and save their scores against your scores, allowing you to see a detailed breakdown of how you wrestle matches in comparison to your buddies. I am not exaggerating, I would have absolutely loved this. I talked about how my friend and I used to try and beat our match scores in WCW Revenge, and it got to the point where we'd need to wrestle hour-long matches in hopes of getting ranked. The system used in Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 is maybe even better because of the amount of detailed information you get about each and every match, and the fact that all your data can be combined makes it even more compelling for score junkies. Again, why this was cut out of WCW vs nWo World Tour, I have no idea. Maybe Aki thought us fans in Europe and America wouldn't care for details and all we wanted to do was wrestle each other. Maybe there's underlying issues with the scoring system that we don't know about and they thought it would be better if they just remove it altogether. I don't know. But finding all this stuff out was a revelation for me, and I can only imagine how many more hours I would have wasted on this game had this scoring feature been included in World Tour. As a matter of fact, I would love to see this in modern wrestling games. With GM mode being back, you could really get into the nitty gritty of match performances and stuff like that, but I also know that's asking way too much of 2K. Instead, we're supposed to get excited when old match types get brought back to new games, and I guess it works too. So yeah, this is all wishful thinking on my behalf. When WCW World Tour got released, some reviewers didn't know what to think of the grapple system. It's kind of funny looking back on now, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. GameSpot said, "A sense of timing is required not only to find holes in your opponent's defenses, but also to find points at which the Nintendo 64 will allow you to perform moves at all." I have absolutely no idea what GameSpot were smoking here because this was easily the most responsive wrestling game to hit the market at that time. So yeah, I just find this comment to be totally inaccurate. Put it this way, test the responsiveness of WCW World Tour against WWF in your house. You'll soon realize what responsiveness is all about. IGN, meanwhile, said, "Everything works quite well despite some instinctive button mashing and slow moving wrestlers at times." Again, compare World Tour to In Your House. What game are you more likely to button mash in? I really don't know anyone who button mashed in Aki wrestling games. There's absolutely no reason to. Well, maybe when you're getting reacquainted with the countering and reversal system, although that takes what, 2 or 3 matches maximum? Nintendo Power was a bit more complimentary though. They said, "The great thing about this game is that you can do a lot without knowing a lot, which makes it perfect for multiplayer matches when 1 or more players may be new to the game." Overall, reviews were pretty positive though, and World Tour was awarded Console Fighting Game of the Year by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, now known as the DICE Awards. It defeated Bloody Roar, Bushido Blade, Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, and WCW Nitro. The following year, WCW Revenge won the award, but in 1999-2000, WWF WrestleMania was beaten by Namco's Soul Calibur. World Tour sold 1.3 million copies in the United States, making it the second best-selling wrestling game on N64 and overall one of the console's best-selling games of all time. But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? What if World Tour had the same roster as Virtual Pro Wrestling 64? What if it had the edit mode and the additional scoring system in place? Maybe it could have done even better in terms of reception and sales. So my recommendation is getting yourself the translation patch for Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 and enjoying the game to the absolute maximum. I'm in no way dismissing WCW World Tour because I absolutely adored that game, but playing its Japanese counterpart feels like playing the full completed version of the game. If you don't feel like patching the game yourself, or if you don't know how to, Google is your friend. You can find pre-patch versions quite easily, and yes, if you still have your N64 or if you're in the market for one, you can play the patch version just fine on original hardware. I recorded this video using an emulator on PC, and this is going to sound very pretentious, but do trust me on this, there's nothing quite like playing this game on an original N64 with the original controller. If you can sway one of your old buddies to come around to relive the glory days, then even better. Both World Tour and VPW64 are not the best Aki wrestling games. The improvements made over time make it obsolete, especially for folks who have no nostalgic attachments to the games at all. But for those who played World Tour all those years ago, this game still holds up in terms of its overall charm. If you remember that feeling when you played World Tour for the very first time, then you're going to have a lot of fun going back to it. If you had no idea at all about the changes made between World Tour and Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, then you're in for a real treat when you play the Japanese game. And personally speaking, I love digging into both games to see what was different and what was added and what was removed. I find all this kind of stuff very fascinating. I know, I'm such an exciting person. But thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll get working on an updated WCW Revenge video very soon. Again, thank you for watching, and please take care.